All right, boys, 5 tips to bulk up without actually gaining fat. I'm currently in a bulking phase. If no one is aware, if anyone's new here, hasn't watched my channel, I've gone from 65 to 78 kg in the last 4 to 5 months, I'd say. I started back in the end of April, start of May. We're at the start of October now, so 5 months, I'd say. And I've learned a lot along the way. I've helped a lot of people do this as well. So I thought I'd just come on here and just pretty much give you 5 tips as quick as possible. We're gonna aim for under 6 minutes starting now. So the first tip that I would say, and something that I preach by massively, is audit your training. Make sure that your training is where it needs to be, because if you're thinking about actually growing muscle, you have to realize that the first key lever is mechanical tension. Essentially, to stimulate any sort of muscle growth, you must have training intensity locked in. So a big mistake that people make is they just simply rely on calories, they rely on food and just assume that, if I eat loads of food, I'll get big, I'll get fucking massive. And as a result, when I diet back down, I'm entitled to having way more muscle. That's not how it works. At the end of the day, food is fuel. Fuel will help you lift more. Fuel will essentially help you get stronger and build more muscle. But if your training intensity was not there from the get-go, then you weren't going to build much muscle in the first place. The reason why is because you're not actually lifting with the correct intensity, you're not lifting with the correct execution, and there's lapses in your training which should not be fixed with food, if that makes sense. So it makes sense for you to make sure your training is completely locked in before you think about pretty much plastering everything with just extra calories. That's just the fastest way to gain a load of unnecessary fat, which actually has a much, much more damaging effect than you think. Because when you gain excess amounts of fat, you then have to diet down to essentially take that fat off. And when you spend more time in a dieting phase than you need to, you spend time in a inferior state for building muscle. Essentially, you are in a dieting phase, which is where you're not going to be building much muscle, and you should have been in an off season for much longer, but you're not, because you gained loads of fat because your training wasn't there and you thought that if you added food, that would fix everything. Do you see why that could be a problem? So make sure that your training is where it needs to be, and let's make sure that rather than just using weight as a metric, we're actually using our lifts. Are we getting stronger? Are we actually progressively overloading every single week? Because at the end of the day, if you're getting stronger, you're building more muscle, and if the weight reflects that, even if it's not going up crazy amounts, if you're a natty and you're getting 0.3 to 0.6 kilogram per week, then you're in a very good spot. But I think what people want is much faster progress, and as a result, they just pack on loads of food and think that will help them. If anything, that's actually going to shoot you in the foot. So be very careful of that and realize that training intensity is the key lever of progress, okay? That's point number 1. The second point is making sure that you track your weight daily and you actually focus on gaining 0.3 to 0.6 kilogram per week, and not just as much weight as possible, right? Because there is a limit of how much muscle you can grow, realistically. If you're gaining 1 to 2 kilogram per week, chances are you are eating way more food than you need to. And what this does, right, is when most people enter an off season, when they enter a gaining phase, they have a weight goal in mind and they forget about body composition. So most people say you start 70 kg and they want to put on 20 kilogram, they get to 90, they just think your weight going up is progress. But again, it's about body composition. You can be gaining fat and not gaining muscle. And the way you make sure that you're not doing that is by having clear metrics, clear KPI targets that you're aiming for, 0.3 to 0.6 kilogram, and making sure that you're hitting that week in, week out. Because if you're doing that, you're going to be in a position where you're actually growing lean tissue with a little bit of spillover, with a little bit of body fat, which is completely understandable, but not a massive amount that's actually going to damage your body composition and then make you have to cut your off season short. Because again, big mistake people make is they act out of emotion. We're wired to do that, right? It's very, very hard to stay in a phase when you're gaining a lot of size and then looking at yourself and saying, I did have abs, now I don't. People act out of emotion and they go, I just want to diet back down again. I'm not enjoying this anymore. And to be honest with you, that's kind of how I feel right now. I look at my physique and I'm like, fuck. I'd love to diet back down. I'd love to see my abs again. But the truth is, if you're a natural, you got to put on around 20 kilo to really see any sort of change, because otherwise it's just a waste of time, just spending all this time in a surplus trying to build loads of muscle to come back down looking the exact same, right? You want to see actual change, we need to put on a load of size, and making sure that you do things slowly in a controlled manner will help you massively. Third tip is making sure that you don't eat everything and anything. Now, truth be told, I'm doing this right now, which isn't great, so I should probably take my own advice. I will be changing that when I go to Bali next week. However, I'm finding right now with my life, I've made it way harder than I need to. And if I could go back, I would basically rent an apartment that has a kitchen so I could actually be in control of my food. Right now, I'm just kind of eating sporadically. And why this is bad is because there is so much decision fatigue every single day. For example, one of my extra side hustles now, alongside my main business, is pretty much thinking, fuck, what am I gonna eat to hit my calories today? And this is just an easy way to set you up for failure. Because when it gets late to around now, 7 p.m, and I've had 2,000 calories, but I need another 2K, McDonald's and all this shit starts going to your mind, and it's just not, it's essentially the epitome of failing to prepare, resulting in preparing to fail, resulting in failing to, oh, for fuck's sake, I've bottled that. It's the epitome of failing to prepare equals preparing to fail. You know what I'm saying? That old quote. That's exactly what's happened here. And the way you fix that, right, is just by simply having a nutrition plan that works for you, that you absolutely love, that you enjoy so much, and you stick to it. And all you do is you just add extra quantity of foods. You get strategic with the quantities and you get strategic with the foods. For example, you add in liquid calories where possible, you add in olive oil perhaps, but you make sure that you actually stick to something and you have this kind of routine sorted out. You have the shopping list organized from Monday, so when you're working, it's all taken care of, and that removes decision fatigue, and consequently, it becomes really, really easy to hit your calorie targets. A big mistake people make is they eat sporadically, they eat off the cuff, and that just creates loads of decisions, which is where you eventually burn out and you're like, oh, fuck this. That's a big mistake I make. So that's what I would do if I was trying to eat big. Now, fourth tip, right? We're trying to build loads of muscle here. We're trying not to gain as much fat. Make sure that you actually use your macros to your advantage. So when it comes to your macros, there's a certain amount of protein you should be consuming. There's a certain amount of fat you should be consuming. However, carbs, they should pretty much make up the excess. Now, typically you want 20 to 30% of your total calories to come from fats. You then want protein to be sitting at around 2.2 gram per kilogram of body weight. Most people need around 200 gram, let's be realistic. So let's assume 200 gram of protein, 20 to 30% of your total calories from fats, and then whatever calories you're on based on pretty much kind of what phase you are in, what week you are in of your off season, and when you're trying to actually gain muscle, you essentially just make up the rest of it as carbs. And what you need to realize is the carbohydrates are going to be the key driver of energy and the key driver of performance, which is essentially going to result in more muscle being built. So make sure that pretty much with everything is stable. So if your protein, fats, carbs, this is like a graph, like everything stays stable. But when it comes to your training session, protein and fats, they stay the same, but the carbs, they get spiked. You make sure that you eat a large carb meal prior to training. And ideally you don't want to be having, heavy carbs. You wouldn't want to have, 200 or 300 grams of sourdough. That wouldn't be great. You'd want high glycemic index carbohydrate, fast releasing, such as dates, kiwi, fruit, any sort of, fruit, banana, honey, whatever it is, cereal, that's just gonna give you a load of energy. And what that's gonna do is gonna convert into glycogen, which is essentially gonna be burnt and used for your performance, which is gonna allow you to train harder and, you guessed it, build more muscle. A big mistake people make is they don't get the macronutrient split, right? Which is understandable, it's okay. People just kind of eat more fats because it's a little bit easier. However, the more carbohydrates you're consuming, the higher likelihood there is for you to build much more muscle because you have more energy. It is as simple as that. That's tip number 4. And finally, the 5th tip to build more muscle, which I know is gonna sound mental, right? Is make sure that you actually film every single one of your exercises and you watch exactly what you're doing. Because I talked about this at the start. I talked about basically improving training intensity and making sure that you're going harder, perhaps training with someone to help you with that. But one thing that I've noticed is you may think that you know everything, but the chances are you don't. It's very easy for me to think I know everything because, I run a coaching business, I'm in good shape myself, and, people listen to me. I'm the best or whatever. That's just a shit mindset. I like to think of myself as just like, I still know nothing. And that's a freeing thought because it always means I can learn more. So I like to record all of my sets. It's actually double productive because it's very useful for my business, from a content standpoint, but it also means I can send them to my coach and I can review them myself and go, shit. So one thing that I noticed when doing a hack squat and doing a leg press was that actually I wasn't getting enough range of motion, and also I was actually overextending at the top to the point where it was quite worrying. It gave me anxiety. Them fucking videos where people pretty much snap their leg and dislocate their knee. Oh man, it gives me the, it makes you scared to think about. That's what I was doing, but I never realized it until I started watching it, and I go, shit, I'm not gonna do that anymore. So guess what I did? I started to actually stop overextending at the top of the movement, and then that put way more tension on my quadricep, and as a result, I'm growing way more muscle in my legs just from the habit of recording my sets. I also realized I'm not getting enough range of motion, which then led me to realizing that my hip flexors are very tight. So I started doing more mobility. And I started opening up the hips prior to actually training, and that's allowed me to get way more range of motion. And all of this just literally came from self-analysis, not just trying to put on loads of weight, but being mature and realizing actually if I'm trying to grow as much muscle as possible, I need to realize that it comes from mechanical tension, and that's essentially what's going to be the core driver, the core lever of actual muscle growth. So get a tripod, record your sessions, watch them back, and try and improve. Think of lifting as any sort of skill. At the start, you can just throw a load of weight on and fuck around, but you want to get really good, there's a little bit of an art to it. Those are my 5 tips. That's today's video. I hope that makes sense. Any questions, please let me know. Other than that, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out. See you next time. Peace.